It's been pretty hard to trust the year 2020, but unless something crazy happens, we are less than a month away from teams reporting for training camp. Now, we've already lost a couple of pointless preseason games, but I am optimistic. And I will say the Patriots finally signing Cam Newton to the steal of the century is a great sign that football is in the air. But today we are talking about breakout wide receivers and the guys that you should or want to be targeting in your fantasy drafts this year. Now, year 3 used to be the year for wide receivers to break out, but the second year has been the more common year for wide receivers to take it to the next level in recent history. Now it seems like year 3 is kind of like the last chance before we should give up on a guy being anything greater than what he's already shown us to be. Mike Clay from ESPN did the math a couple years ago using 150 fantasy points as the benchmark for a guy having a breakout season. And basically 82% of wide receivers that are going to hit that threshold by their 6th season have already done it within their first 3 seasons. And right before we get started, let me go ahead and remind you to please hit that like button. Goal is 1,000 likes on this video. Let's get right into it. At number 10, I've got John Ross for the Bengals, and while I've built up the second and third year wide receivers as guys primed for breakouts, the first guy on this list is actually a 4th year guy, but when you factor in all the injuries he's had and games he's missed, it's kind of like he's still only entering his 3rd season. John Ross has had a tragic beginning to his NFL career. All the pre-draft concerns about his size and durability have reared their ugly heads, but when he's healthy, Mr. 4.2240 himself is absolutely electric. You can see that at the beginning of the 2019 NFL season, where he made a trip back to the state of Washington where he played his college ball and absolutely torched the Seahawks. In fact, in the 24 games he has played, he started in 19 of them, so when he's healthy, he's been a legit starter for the Bengals. And then in April, the Bengals went and drafted T. Higgins in the 2nd round of the 2020 NFL draft, and he was one of my top wide receivers coming in. I actually dubbed him as a baby AJ Green in my top 10 wide receivers video, and he ironically finds himself in position to eventually be AJ Green's replacement. But Tyler Boyd and John Ross currently sit above Higgins on the depth chart for now, and with this abbreviated season, I'm taking the stance that I expect most NFL coaches will also employ, and that's lumping veterans over rookie counterparts until further notice. Now, that's not a one-size-fits-all label, though. Number 1 overall pick Joe Burrow should be the starting quarterback from day 1 for the Bengals because they don't have any better options, and Joe Burrow was already an older guy by NFL draft standards. For that, I don't anticipate the Bengals putting a lot of their passing game on the shoulders of 2 rookies. So that leaves T. Higgins to sort of develop and get acclimated to the NFL for a year. Now, John Ross had a son who was born shortly after he became an NFL player, and I can tell you as a young dad myself that there are a lot of changes in your life after having kids, and it is a real struggle to maintain a healthy balance of family, friends, and work. Assuming that this homebound lifestyle has given us all an adequate amount of family time, John Ross has hopefully been able to get his mind and body right for 2020 because his NFL career is pretty much at a crossroads. And I don't expect it, but there are some fan bases out there hoping that they can acquire this speedster for pennies to the draft dollar that the Bengals spent on him. We've been hearing about the rumors of a John Ross trade since before the 2020 NFL draft, but it's just been a lot of smoke thus far. If John Ross isn't traded or released, he could find himself in a really good position to thrive if healthy. And the Bengals spent a lot of money this offseason, and a healthy version of this Bengals squad could surprise some people. Let's stay in the AFC North for my second player in as many videos from this Steelers offense. So at number 9, I've got Deante Johnson. Now, this duo with breakout potential is just a result of good drafting, but then underperforming in a stagnant offense that was missing the main cog that makes the engine go, and that's their quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger. Mason Rudolph, this is a clown quarterback, and the other guy's name is Duck. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's all I had to say about that.
I wasn't as informed as I would have hoped when the Steelers surprisingly took Deante Johnson in the 3rd round, but I didn't want to question the Steelers based on their track record. In my running back breakout video, I mentioned the Steelers' formula for drafting wide receivers that's had pretty convincing results. I couldn't find the graphic that showcased their combine attributes, but maybe one of you guys can help me find that. Deante Johnson actually outplayed James Washington as a rookie, despite Washington getting a chance to rekindle that Oklahoma State magic with his college quarterback. Johnson is as sure-handed as a wide receiver as you can get, who can also get deep and provides a spark in the return game. I think that he could easily provide wide receiver 2 upside. He's getting a lot of Jarvis Landry comps because he's such a reliable target, while also not really jumping off the screen at you with any individual trait. Seems like a contradiction to the wide receiver draft formula I mentioned earlier, right? But this is why scouting and drafting, this stuff's such an inexact science. We'll see if a full season with Ben Roethlisberger and Deante Johnson will prove that the Steelers have once again captured magic in a bottle and drafted another baller at wide receiver. I know they drafted Chase Claypool, I'm not leaving him out again, but once again, it is is the rookie thing factoring in here, I'm giving the nod to the veteran, especially when we saw them play as well as Johnson did in 2019. At number 8, I've got Ravens wide receiver Marquise Brown, and somehow we are 3 for 3 with AFC North wide receivers here, but this is the final guy from the division. Sorry, Cleveland. Marquise Brown made an impact on the Ravens passing game in the first and final game for the 2019 edition of the Baltimore Ravens. He went off against the Dolphins in week 1, and he was a bright spot for the passing game in their lone playoff game, which was a loss to the Titans, but due to constant nagging injuries, his production throughout the season was feast or famine. Speaking of eating, Marquise Brown reportedly played in 2019 at 157 pounds. That's insane. We knew that he was small coming out of Oklahoma, but that's like really tiny. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to train at an NFL facility all offseason, but that same report is also saying that he should still be closer to 170 pounds going into this season. This should help with the injury issues because there's no way he could maintain an NFL career under $160. When Marquise Brown was heavily targeted in 2019, he and Lamar Jackson made magic happen. If you're a big believer in Lamar, then you have to expect that he'll take another step forward in his only second full season as the starter, and Marquise Brown figures to be one of the main benefactors for Lamar Jackson's continued development. So real quick before we move on to the rest of the video, this is the second episode of my 4-part series, and guys, I need your help. The first episode was based on the running backs, but I took some time off from making videos during the early parts of quarantine. I know that sounds backwards, but try being stuck at home with 3 kids and your wife, and you'd understand some of us actually had less time during all this mess. Anyways, when you're done with this episode, please go watch the running backs one so YouTube will connect these two in the algorithm and hopefully jumpstart my channel. If you hit the like button on both, that'd be cool too. I'll throw a comment on there if you're feeling really helpful. After this series, I'm shifting to more essay-based stuff, and I want to do more of the how they win the Super Bowl type of video like I did last summer, so stay tuned to that, but let's get right back into this top 10. At number 7, I've got the Texans wide receiver Will Fuller, the
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Apparently, being the best wide receiver, though, in the league doesn't make you immune to the trade block, so DeAndre Hopkins must have been too real with Bill O'Brien in the locker room, and moving on from Hopkins elevates Will Fuller into the wide receiver 1 role for the Texans. You could argue that Fuller's already been producing like a wide receiver 1 at times when he's been in the game, but those hamstrings of his have been the Achilles heel. When Deshaun Watson was inserted as the starting quarterback during his rookie year, he and Fuller connected for a historic run where Fuller had 7 touchdown catches in 4 games. The chemistry was off the charts from day 1. Will Fuller probably helped you win a fantasy league or 2 if you were quick enough to pick him up in the waiver wire that year. But those damned injuries are such a killer for his value in redraft leagues. The upside though, if, and this is a big if he stays healthy for the first few weeks or even all the way up until the trade deadline, Fuller could be one of the biggest steals in the draft and either give you insane production and or giving you good value in a trade. So if you feel like the other shoe will drop and it's only a matter of time until he gets injured, you can move him for someone that falls in love with his big play potential while you get a more reliable player for a playoff run. Now, Brandon Cooks was also added in a trade by the Texans this offseason, and despite suffering some brutal concussions in the last year, Cooks has actually only missed 2 regular season games, and those both came last year. But his production has been spotty, and getting traded to your 4th team in 5 years is not a good sign. And this might seem weird, but Brandon Cooks might actually be a handcuff to Will Fuller, or vice versa, whichever one you value more. But you heard me right, a wide receiver handcuff. If you found yourself drafting near the turn and you have a need a wide receiver and these 2 are on the board, I might just take both with back-to-back picks. You're almost guaranteed to get the number 1 receiving option for Deshaun Watson's passing game. And hell, I think so highly of Watson and the progression he might make now that he's the bona fide alpha dog on this offense that I'd stack 3 deep with this Texans passing game in redraft leagues, maybe in rounds 5, 6, 7, and definitely if one fell to the 8th. But Randall Cobb might be more realistic of an option as a wide receiver handcuff for Fuller and even Cooks for that matter. Either way, I would recommend an insurance policy to these Texans wide receivers. And while I'm still down on the Hopkins trade, David Johnson has the potential to win comeback player of the year. Here comes another big if he can stay healthy. With a consistent and dedicated emphasis on the running game, the passing game has a chance to be that much more explosive even if the volume takes a slight hit. This Texans offense needs the stars to align, and they're relying on the health of a lot of guys with poor track records, mind you, and in a year where a virus could actually be the most common diagnosis on the weekly injury report. But the reason that I would entertain loading up with Deshaun and his wide receivers is because it's like taking a couple of lottery tickets that have a high risk but even higher reward. Alright, at number 6, I did have Deebo Samuel here for the 49ers until he broke his foot. And while that's a terrible situation for him and the 49ers wide receiving core, I hope he takes his time to get back. This isn't the season to rush back from an injury, but the 49ers are going to need him down the stretch if they're to make another run for the Super Bowl. I replaced Deebo Samuel with a guy that I wasn't really even considering until the latest NFL headline signing, and that's how much I think Cam Newton can provide the Patriots at 31 years young. I gotta tell you how humbling it is for myself as a 32-year-old to be here hearing how Cam is old and washed up. I mean, I'm old and washed up, but I'm not a professional athlete. I'm a professional dad at this point, but Cam Newton is going to be as motivated as ever to be the latest and possibly greatest reclamation project of Bill Belichick's.
But I'm gonna keep this shit brief. I'm at your neck.
And I was really high on their first round draft pick last year, and I think that N'Keal Harry is going to be the greatest beneficiary of the Cam Newton addition. Cam has always preferred the bigger wide receivers, and he was able to take a young Kelvin Benjamin and turn him into a really productive wide receiver before making the transition to professional eater. N'Keal Harry does not have a lot of competition in the way of wide receiver depth on this Patriots roster. Julian Edelman's obviously the number one guy, but N'Keal Harry's definitely got that wide receiver one mold and size to play on the outside. He didn't get a lot of opportunities last year to shine because of the early season injuries, but I wouldn't be surprised if he leads this offense in receiving yards and touchdowns this year. At number 6, I've got Redskins wide receiver Scary Terry McLaurin, and this is the second Redskins player in as many positional videos that I think is headed for a big season in 2020. I gotta play the odds here, right? McLaurin already had a big season as a rookie in 2019, thriving as the lone bright spot in one of the worst passing attacks in the league, but I think that Scary Terry is about to be a nickname known in every household. As far as value in fantasy redraft leagues, he might not provide the best return on investment because he's already a known commodity, and you will have to use a pretty good draft pick to get him. But the good news is there's literally nobody else on this Redskins offense that is going to be stealing targets from McLaurin, especially with his college quarterback throwing it to him. He's a guy that wouldn't stand out if he walked down the street in his COVID face mask because he's only 6 foot, 200 pounds, but this guy has got the abilities of a young Antonio Brown without the off the field stuff that we know of, at least so far. It's ironic that he gets to play with his college quarterback in Dwayne Haskins, because while Haskins' big arm looks like an ideal fit with McLaurin's speed, Haskins is actually the biggest concern in what could hold back McLaurin in his sophomore season. Haskins has got to do a lot of maturing as far as being a leader of grown men, but also as making reads as a quarterback too. I'm worried with McLaurin being his first, second, and third option in the passing game that he might start to lock on a little bit, which is only going to hurt the production of both Dwayne Haskins and Terry McLaurin. But if they're able to keep a good balance of running and passing, I think that Haskins is going to get McLaurin even more than his 2019 splits that put him at about 106 targets over a 16-game sample. At number 4, I've got DJ Moore for the Panthers. Now, Curtis Samuel has been on many preseason breakout lists for a few seasons, and the Panthers added yet another annual breakout candidate in Robbie Anderson. But don't expect DJ Moore to take over as the Panthers' yearly representative of untapped potential. When I looked back, I was very surprised actually that DJ Moore had one of the quietest 1,000-yard seasons that I can remember. So you could argue that he's already broken out, but the performance kind of got lost in the shuffle of a very inconsistent season by the Panthers. Now that he's established himself as the Panthers' alpha wide receiver, it's time to make himself a wide receiver one, and it starts with offensive coordinator Joe Brady setting him up to at least eclipse Christian McCaffrey in targets this year. I expect Moore to play the Jamar Chase role in this offense, but also get used in some underneath routes and misdirection, jet sweeps, that kind of stuff. If I'm being fair though, the hesitation that I would give with DJ Moore is that 1, I was a big fan of his coming out of Maryland, so I'm a fanboy, and 2, although he is yet to capture the national attention, he's most definitely caught the attention of defensive coordinators and should see a lot more coverage shaded his way, might get manned up against the best cornerback on a weekly basis nowadays, and he's going to be playing with Teddy Bridgewater, who's not been a very dynamic or productive down the field thrower thus far. I always want my fantasy players to be on winning teams because winning teams typically score more points, and a lot of people are not expecting the Panthers to do all that well this year. I'm still a little bit torn on them. I want to root for Teddy Bridgewater to play well, but I'm not getting my hopes up. At number 3, I've got Cowboys wide receiver Michael Gallup. I mean, come on, you knew a Cowboys player was going to show up eventually on one of these lists, but Michael Gallup is legitimately warranted. CeeDee Lamb is going to be the guy that gets all the hype as their surprise draft pick, while Amari Cooper is now getting paid and should still be the number 1 guy targeted in this Cowboys offense. Michael Gallup has been making some strides in his first 2 seasons in the NFL, and he's really just been a couple of Dak overthrows away from looking like a dominant wide receiver, but he's another guy that does it without any eye-popping attributes and just an overall well-rounded game. This Cowboys offense has potential to put up numbers, and Michael Gallup could be a very valuable player, put up pretty decent numbers each week, but only if he's drafted appropriately. And then I'm speeding through these last few to keep this video nice, short, and sweet. At number 2, I've got AJ Brown from the Titans. His rookie season was a tale of two parts, much like the way the rest of the Titans team performed in 2019. Marcus Mariota has been holding back wide receivers in this offense for 5 years, and then Tannehill came in, and it was like taking off the governor of this entire offense as a whole. Once AJ Brown got targeted accurately and consistently in 2019, he exploded onto the scene to complement the Titans' dominant running game from Derrick Henry. And in the final 6 games of the Titans' regular season, AJ Brown had 4 games with over 100 yards receiving, and those 4 games made up of over 50% of the yards from his season total. If the Titans can recapture that magic in 2020, this is going to be one of the most well-balanced teams in the league. However, due to that balance, AJ Brown might not have a ceiling as high as some of these guys on the list have, but he's going to be a steady contributor as the Titans prepare to make him the wide receiver 1 in this offense. But as always with instant impact rookies, beware of the sophomore slump. And then at number 1, my love for this guy has been well documented on this channel. I don't do scouting reports very often, but I knew I wanted to put my name in for the DK Metcalf fan club before it filled up. This guy is one of the most physically gifted wide receivers we've seen since Julio Jones, and I think he barely scratched the surface in his rookie season. It's actually incredible that the top 2 wide receivers from last year's draft class find themselves at the top 2 of this list going into their second seasons. And oh yeah, they played on the same Ole Miss team. In fact, Jordan Ta'amu has them to thank for his short shot in the XFL. Tyler Lockett is another wide receiver I'm a huge fan of, and the fact that these two very different yet very dynamic wide receivers get to play with one of the best quarterbacks of this generation, it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch. Way too often these future Hall of Fame quarterbacks end their careers with guys like Julian Edelman being their best receiving threat, but DK has the chance to be the alpha wide receiver in Seattle and could be a top 5 wide receiver in this league in a year or 2. Obviously he needs to improve the drops, and those go back to his college days. He had 7 drops passes on record, which was the 11th most in the league, but I'll settle for a few drops when you're torching secondaries on the reg. The biggest concern with DK Metcalf is the offense itself that he's playing in and the scheme. I understand wanting to have a run first offense, and long term I think it serves best for big play wide receivers to have an established running game to open up the deep play action pass game. But I question if offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer knows how to properly take advantage of a wide receiver of this caliber. Most of the impact plays from this passing game seem to be improv when Russell Wilson turns into a backyard quarterback, and his receivers are aware of this, and then they are able to get back onto the same page. This backyard football style though actually serves DK Metcalf really well as far as the short to intermediate passing game goes, because he's not going to be the best route runner. His lack of agility was well documented at the NFL Combine, but when it turns into backyard football, it's basically like a basketball game, and he's going to be the biggest guy out there and should be able to post up and make big plays for Russell Wilson. I'm expecting a huge year as far as touchdowns go from him. That's going to do it for me today. Appreciate you guys watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. Once again, please hit that like button. Help me restart this channel so we can get back on track for this season. And I will have things coming out for you guys on a weekly basis. Like I said, I want to get through these breakout players so that I can start doing some unique, creative stuff that is all based on my own thoughts rather than just some lists that are a little bit more generic. But I need YouTube's algorithm to wake up and realize that I am back so that my time and effort and energy doesn't get wasted by YouTube just not showing anybody my video. But I appreciate you guys so much for staying all the way until the end here. Once again, I am so glad to be back doing these videos, and I'm getting pretty excited for football season. I'm hoping that nothing stands in our way, but hopefully you guys are all doing everything that you can to help us get through this time. Just put on a mask already, all right? Stay safe out there, and I will see you all in the next video.